Jake Morrison woke up to the sound of humming metal and the taste of copper in his mouth. His head felt like someone had used it as a hammer against steel. When he tried to move his hands, cold crystal touched his wrists. He opened his eyes and saw blue light dancing around his arms, like frozen lightning. The room around him was not human. The walls curved in ways that hurt to look at. Strange symbols glowed softly along the ceiling. The air smelled like wet stone, and something sharp that made his nose burn. Jake tried to remember how he got here, but his mind felt foggy, and it all came back to him like a punch to the stomach. The UES, Voyager, had been humanity's first real attempt at making friends with aliens. Jake had been chosen to lead the mission because he was good with people. He could talk his way out of almost anything. His crew had trusted him to keep them safe while they reached out to the stars. 3 days ago, they had found the Zephyrian. Ships waiting near the edge of their solar system. The alien vessels looked like giant insects made of black metal and crystal. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Jake had ordered his communications officer to send peaceful greetings in every language they knew. The Zephyrians had surrounded the Voyager without saying a word. Jake had watched on the main screen as more and more alien ships appeared. His heart had started beating faster, but he kept his voice calm. He told his crew they would wait and show the aliens that humans came in peace. Captain Lisa Hayes had been his second in command. She was smart and brave and never backed down from a fight when it mattered. When the Zephyrian ships had started moving closer, she had suggested they fire warning shots to show they could defend themselves. Jake had said no. He wanted to give peace a chance, but then the first Zephyrian ship had opened fire without warning. The energy beam had cut through the Voyager's shields like they were made of paper. Lisa had shouted orders to return fire, but it was too late. More beams hit the ship. People were screaming. The lights went out. Jake remembered the explosion that threw him across the bridge. He remembered Lisa's face covered in blood as she tried to reach the emergency controls. He remembered the hull breaking apart around them as air rushed out into space. And everything had gone black. Now Jake was alone in an alien prison. His crew was dead. His ship was destroyed. All because he had chosen to trust instead of fight. The door to his cell made no sound as it opened. A Zephyrian walked in, and Jake got his first close look at one of them. The alien was tall like a basketball player, but much thinner. Its skin looked like black glass that had been polished until it shined. Its eyes were the color of honey and seemed to glow with their own light. The Zephyrian wore what looked like armor made from the same crystal that held Jake's hands. Symbols covered the chest piece. Jake guessed they showed rank or maybe family. The alien carried no weapon that Jake could see, but he had a feeling it did not need one. "You are awake," the alien said in English. Its voice sounded like wind blowing through broken glass. Jake tried to stand, but the chains around his wrists were connected to the floor. He could only sit up straight. "My name is Jake Morrison. I was the captain of the human ship Voyager. We came in peace." The alien tilted its head to one side, like a bird studying a bug. "I am Lieutenant Thezes of the Imperial Guard. You are a prisoner of the Zephyrian Empire. Your ship attacked our scouts." "That's not true," Jake said. His voice stayed calm, even though his heart was racing. "Your people fired first. We were only defending ourselves." Thezes walked closer. Up close, Jake could see that the alien's skin was not smooth. Tiny scales covered its body like a snake. When it moved, the scales caught the blue light and sparkled. "Your people are weak," Thezes said. "You fight like children. You build ships like toys. Yet you dared to enter our space and challenge us." Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting mad would not help him now. "We came to talk, not to fight." We wanted to learn about your people. We wanted to be friends. Dizes made a sound that might have been laughter. Friends. Your people do not understand friendship. You understand only fear and death. Soon you will understand both very well. Where are you taking me? To face Empress Kyla Vorthik, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire. She will decide how you die. The alien turned to leave, but Jake called out, "Wait, can you tell me something?" Dizes stopped, but did not turn around. "Your language." Jake said, "I heard some of your people talking when they brought me here. It sounds like music. Beautiful music. Could you teach me some words?" This time Dizes did turn around. The alien stared at Jake for a long moment. "You wish to learn our tongue?" "If I'm going to die, I want to face your Empress with respect. I want to speak to her in her own language." Dizes was quiet for so long that Jake thought he would not answer. Then the alien said one word. "Honor. What does that mean in your language?" "Vector," Dizes said slowly. "It means to stand tall when others would fall. It means to face death without fear." Jake repeated the word. His pronunciation was terrible, but Dizes nodded. "Perhaps you are not as weak as I thought," the alien said. "I will return tomorrow. If you truly wish to learn, I will teach you." After Dizes left, Jake sat alone in his cell, thinking about his dead crew and his destroyed ship. He thought about Earth, so far away that its light would take years to reach this place. He thought about the families who would never know what happened to their loved ones. But mostly he thought about the word vector and what it really meant. Standing tall when others would fall. Facing death without fear. Jake Morrison had led his people into disaster. He had failed as a captain and as a human. But maybe he could still succeed as something else. Maybe he could show these aliens that humans were worth more than they thought. The blue light of his chains cast shadows on the curved walls. In 3 days, he would stand before an alien empress who wanted him dead. He would probably never see Earth again, or hold another human hand. But he would face whatever came with Victor. He would stand tall. The throne room made Jake feel like an ant walking into a cathedral built by giants. The ceiling stretched up so high that shadows hid the top. Living walls pulsed with veins of green and blue light that moved like slow lightning. The air itself seemed to breathe around him. Dizes had kept his promise over the past 3 days. Every day the alien guard had returned to teach Jake more words in the Zephyrian language. Jake learned that their speech was built on concepts of honor and strength. There were 17 different words for courage, but only one word for surrender. Walk. With Victor, Dizes had told him that morning, "Today you die, but you can choose how you are remembered." Now Jake walked between 2 guards toward the throne at the far end of the great hall. His crystal chains had been replaced with lighter ones that let him move his arms. His human clothes had been cleaned and mended. Someone had decided he should look presentable when he faced judgment. The Zephyrians who filled the throne room were nothing like the soldiers who had captured him. These aliens wore robes that seemed to be made from starlight itself. Jewelry covered their necks and arms. Some had scales that changed color as Jake passed. Others had crests of bone that rose from their heads like crowns. They all stared at him with those honey-colored eyes. Some looked curious. Others looked disgusted. Most looked like they were watching something that would entertain them before dinner. Jake kept his eyes forward and tried to remember everything Dizes had taught him. The proper way to stand before the Empress. The words he would be allowed to say. The way to show respect without showing weakness. Then he saw her and forgot everything else. Empress Kyla Vorthik sat on a throne that looked like it had grown from the living floor itself. She was huge, nearly 8 feet tall, even sitting down. Her scales were deeper black than space between stars. Scars covered her arms and face in patterns that Jake somehow new were not from accidents, but from victories. Her eyes were not honey. Like the others, they burned like small suns. When she looked at Jake, he felt like she could see right through him to his bones. "Bring the human forward," she said. Her voice filled the great hall without effort. Every word was clear and sharp. As broken glass dot, the guards pushed Jake closer to the throne. When they stopped, he was only 10 feet away from the most powerful being in the galaxy. Up close, he could see that her claws were as long as his fingers. Her teeth were white as pearls and sharp as knives. "You are the one who led the attack on our scouts," the Empress said. It was not a question. Jake had planned what to say. Dizes had helped him practice the formal words of greeting. He was supposed to bow his head and ask for mercy. That was how prisoners were expected to behave. Instead, Jake stood as straight as his chains allowed and spoke in Zephyrian. "Great Empress, I am Jake Morrison of the human species. I come before you with Victor and speak truth without fear." The sound that rose from the watching aliens was like wind through a forest of crystal. No one had expected the human to speak their language. Jake's words were clumsy, and his accent was terrible, but everyone understood him perfectly. Empress Kayla leaned forward on her throne. For a moment that felt like an hour, she stared at Jake without speaking. Then she said, "You learned our tongue in 3 days?" "I learned what I could, Great Empress. Lieutenant Dizes was a good teacher. I wanted to speak to you with respect." "Dizes," the Empress called. The guard who had taught Jake stepped forward and bowed low. "You taught this human our sacred language?" "Yes, Great Empress. He asked to learn. He showed proper attitude toward our ways." "Interesting." The Empress stood up from her throne, and Jake had to tilt his head back to look at her face. She was even more impressive standing. Her presence filled the room like thunder. "No prisoner has ever addressed me in our tongue. No offender has ever asked to learn our ways." A Zephyrian in golden robes stepped forward from the crowd. "Great Empress, this human is clearly trying to trick you. His people are known for their lies and deception." Jake felt anger flash through him, but he kept his face calm. He had learned from those that showing emotion was seen as weakness. "General Korath speaks wisdom," another alien said. "The humans destroyed our scout ship with no warning. They are barbarians who understand only violence." "That is not true," Jake said, still in Zephyrian. "My people came in peace. We sent messages of friendship. Your scouts fired first." "You lie," General Korath said. His scales turned deep red with anger. "Our scouts reported hostile action from your vessel." "Your scouts reported wrong," Jake replied. His voice stayed steady. "Captain Lisa Hayes gave the order to fire only after your people attacked us. She was protecting her crew." "That is not hostile. That is duty." The Empress raised one clawed hand, and the hall fell silent. "You defend your dead captain's actions?" "I defend her honor," Jake said. "Lisa Hayes was a good soldier and a good person. She died trying to save her crew. In your language, she showed Victor until her last breath." Something changed in the Empress's burning eyes. "You use our word for honor to describe a human?" "I use your word because humans have no word that means the same thing. We have courage and bravery and duty. But Vector is more than all of those together. Lisa Hayes had Vector. So did my communications officer Ben Clark, who kept sending peace messages even when the ship was breaking apart. So did Chief Engineer Rita Fox, who stayed at her post to give others time to escape." Jake paused and looked around the great hall. Every alien was listening to him now. Even the ones who had looked disgusted before were paying attention. "My people died with Victor," he continued. "They could have run, but they stayed to protect. Others, they could have surrendered, but they fought to the end. They were not barbarians. They were warriors who deserved better than to die in the dark between stars. General Korth stepped closer to Jake. You speak pretty words, human. But words are wind. Your people are weak. Your ships are fragile. You have no right to sail among the stars with real civilizations. Maybe you are right, Jake said. Maybe we are weak compared to you. Maybe our ships are fragile and our weapons are like toys. But we came to your space anyway. We came because we wanted to meet you and learn from you. Does that sound like the action of cowards? The Empress walked down from her throne until she stood directly in front of Jake. This close, he could smell something like cinnamon and lightning on her skin. Her eyes looked into his, and he felt like she was reading his soul. You interest me, human Jake Morrison, she said. Most prisoners beg for mercy or curse their captors. You do neither. You defend the dead and speak of honor in a language you learned in 3 days. Why? Jake met her burning gaze without blinking. Because that is what humans do, Great Empress. We do not abandon our own, even in death. We do not forget those who died trying to do the right thing. And we do not lie to save ourselves when truth might serve others better. The Empress was quiet for a long time. Around the hall, Zephyrians whispered to each other in voices too low for Jake to hear. He could feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes watching him. Finally, the Empress spoke. I grant you the right of Velinosh, human. You may speak in your own defense before this court passes judgment. The whispers became gasps. Geizes had taught Jake about Velinosh. It was an ancient right given only to warriors who had earned respect through their actions. No alien had ever expected a human to receive such an honor. I thank you for this gift, Great Empress, Jake said, bowing his head slightly. I will use it with Victor. The Empress returned to her throne and sat down. When she spoke again, her voice carried to every corner of the great hall. Speak then, Jake Morrison of the humans. Tell us why your people deserve to live among the stars. Jake stood in the center of the great hall with the weight of 2 civilizations on his shoulders. Every word he spoke now would decide not just his own fate, but the future of every human who might one day reach for the stars. Great Empress. He began in Zephyrian, then switched to English so his meaning would be completely clear. I will not lie to you about what happened when our ships met. Captain Lisa Hayes did give the order to fire on your scouts, but I ask you to understand why she made that choice. He paused and looked around the hall at the watching faces. My people had never met another intelligent species before. We had dreamed of it for thousands of years. We had wondered if we were alone in the universe. When we found your ships, it was the most important moment in human history. General Korth made a sound of disgust. Yet your first action was violence. No, Jake said firmly. Our first action was to send messages of peace in 17 different languages. For 2 hours, Captain Hayes broadcast on every frequency we knew. She sent mathematical formulas to show we were intelligent. She sent music to show we could create beauty. She sent pictures of our world and our children to show we valued life. Jake's voice grew stronger as he continued. Your scouts surrounded us and said nothing. They moved closer when we asked them to keep their distance. When Captain Hayes finally fired, she aimed her shots to miss your ships by several kilometers. They were warning shots, not an attack. Warning shots are still acts of aggression, another alien called out. Yes, Jake agreed, but they were also acts of communication. Captain Hayes was trying to say, we do not want to fight, but we will defend ourselves if we must. She was hoping your people would understand that message and respond. The Empress leaned forward slightly. Instead, our scouts opened fire. Yes, Great Empress. And when they did, Captain Hayes had to choose between letting her crew die or fighting back. She chose to fight, not because she wanted war, but because she had a duty to protect the people who trusted her. Jake looked directly at the Empress as he spoke. In your language, there is a word, tekval. Lieutenant Theises taught it to me. It means the responsibility a leader has to those who follow them. Captain Hayes understood tekval, even if she had no word for it. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Jake was using their concepts to explain human actions, and it was working. But let me tell you who humans really are, Jake continued. We are not the strongest species that ever lived on our world. We are not the fastest or the largest or the most dangerous. For most of our history, bigger animals hunted us and killed us. He began to walk slowly back and forth in front of the throne, his chains clinking softly. But we survived because we learned to work together. A human alone is weak, but humans together can do impossible things. We learned to share food with strangers. We learned to take care of children who were not our own. We learned to sacrifice ourselves for people we had never met. General Korath stepped forward. Pretty words, human. But your history is full of wars. Your people fight each other constantly. How do you explain that? Jake nodded. You are right, General. Humans have fought terrible wars. We have done awful things to each other. But do you know what makes us different from other species? We feel guilty about it afterwards. He turned to face the general directly. When humans do wrong, other humans stand up and say, "This is not right." We write songs about the victims of war. We build monuments to remember the dead. We teach our children that the wars we fought were mistakes that should never happen again. You claim to learn from your mistakes, the Empress said. Yet you continue to fight. Yes, great Empress. But we also continue to save each other. Let me tell you about a human named Alex Cooper. 3 years ago, he was a soldier in one of our wars. An enemy bomb exploded near him and hurt him badly. He could have stayed safe in the hospital. Jake's voice became softer, more personal. Instead, Alex Cooper went back to the battlefield. Not to fight, but to be a medic. He spent the rest of the war running into danger to save wounded soldiers. He saved enemies as often as he saved friends. He said that once someone was hurt, they were no longer enemies. They were just people who needed help. The hall was completely quiet now. Even the living walls seemed to have stopped pulsing. Alex Cooper died pulling a wounded enemy soldier out of a burning building. The soldier lived and went home to his family. At Alex's funeral, that man stood up and spoke about the human who had died to save him. He said Alex Cooper had taught him that courage was not about being willing to kill. It was about being willing to die for someone else. Jake looked up at the Empress. That is what humans are, great Empress. We are the species that runs toward danger to help others. We are the species that shares our food with our enemies if they are hungry. We are the species that looks at the stars and dreams, not of conquest, but of friendship. A new voice spoke from the crowd. You paint a noble picture of your people. But if humans are so good, why do you have crime? Why do you have poverty and suffering? Jake turned toward the speaker, an elderly Zephyrian with white scales. Because we are not perfect, honored elder. We make mistakes and bad choices. Some humans are selfish and cruel. But here is what makes us special. When bad things happen, good humans show up to fix them. He thought of Earth, so far away. In our cities, we have people whose job is to run toward danger when others run away. We call them firefighters and police officers and paramedics. They are not soldiers, but they risk their lives every day to help strangers. They get paid very little money for this. They do it because they believe it is right. You speak of individuals, General Korath said. What about your species as a whole? What do humans do together? Jake smiled for the first time since entering the hall. We explore. We discover. We create. We have humans who spend their entire lives studying tiny insects, because they think all life is interesting. We have humans who paint pictures that no one will buy because they think beauty is important. We have humans who work for decades to cure diseases that will never affect them personally. He gestured toward the ceiling. We came to your space in a ship that took us 50 years to build. Thousands of humans worked on that project. Most of them died before it was finished. They knew they would never see the stars, but they built the ship anyway because they wanted their children to meet other species. The Empress stood up from her throne again. This time she walked down the steps slowly, her burning eyes never leaving Jake's face. You describe a species of dreamers and heroes, she said, but I have seen your entertainment broadcasts. Your movies are full of violence and war. Your news shows nothing but conflict and hatred. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. She had been studying human transmissions. Yes, Great Empress. But what stories do we tell in those movies? Most of them are about good people fighting against evil. They are about heroes who sacrifice themselves to save others. Even our war movies usually end with characters learning that peace is better than fighting. He took a deep breath. And our news shows conflict, because that is what we consider unusual. When a human helps another human, we do not report it, because it happens so often, we think it is normal. We only report violence because it surprises us. The Empress was now close enough to touch him. Jake could see his reflection in her burning eyes. One more question, human Jake Morrison. If I were to release you now and send you back to your people, what would you tell them about us? Jake did not hesitate. I would tell them I met a species with honor and wisdom. I would tell them about Lieutenant Thizes, who showed kindness to a prisoner by teaching him your language. I would tell them about you, Great Empress, who gave me the right to speak when you could have simply ordered my death. The great hall was silent, except for the soft sound of Jake's breathing and the distant hum of the living walls. I would tell my people that the Zephyrians are not enemies to fear, but potential friends to respect. The silence that followed Jake's words stretched like a held breath across the great hall. Empress Kayla stood so close to him that he could see the ancient scars that decorated her face like silver thread. Each mark told the story of a battle. One, an enemy defeated, a challenge overcome. Then something happened that no one in the hall had ever seen before. The Empress began to rise, not standing up from sitting, but actually rising higher. Her great height lifted until she seemed to tower even above her normal impressive stature. The movement was slow and deliberate, like a mountain deciding to reach toward the sky. Gasps echoed through the throne room. Several of the watching nobles stepped backward. General Korath's mouth fell open, and his scales flickered rapidly through colors Jake had not seen before. Jake did not understand what was happening, but he could feel the weight of it. The very air in the hall seemed to change, becoming thicker and more electric. The living walls pulsed brighter, as if responding to something momentous. Great Empress, General Korath whispered, his voice barely audible. You honor him with the Velfic. But he is only a prisoner. He is not even Zephyrian. The Empress continued to rise until she stood at her full ceremonial height. Jake realized, now that her normal posture had been relaxed, almost casual. This was how she appeared when receiving kings and emperors from other worlds. I rise for courage, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. I rise for truth spoken in the face of death. I rise for honor shown by one who has every reason to show hatred instead. She looked down at Jake with those burning eyes. When she spoke again, it was in perfect English, without any accent at all. If I released you now, Jake Morrison of the humans, would you return to warn your people of our might and urge them to surrender? Jake felt the blood drain from his face. She spoke his language like she had been born to it. How long had she been studying Earth? What else did she know about his species? But the question demanded an answer, and Jake had promised to speak only truth, No, Great Empress, he said clearly. I would not. Another wave of shocked whispers ran through the crowd. Even Isis looked surprised. I would return to my people, Jake continued, and I would tell them about the Zephyrian Empire. I would tell them about your strength and your honor. I would urge my leaders to seek peace with you, but not from fear. He looked up at her towering form. I would ask them to seek peace from respect, because I have seen that the Zephyrian people value the same things humans value, even if we express them differently. You understand duty and sacrifice and the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. Those are not the values of conquerors. They are the values of guardians. The Empress studied him for a long moment. Then she did something even more unprecedented than rising to her ceremonial height. She smiled. It was not a human smile. Her teeth were too sharp and her features too angular. But Jake could see warmth in those burning eyes, and something that looked almost like approval. General Korith, she said, turning slightly toward her military advisor. You have studied the human transmissions as I ordered. Tell the court what you have learned. The general's scales were still shifting colors rapidly. Great Empress, their communications are unusual. They broadcast their entertainment to the entire galaxy without encryption. They send mathematical and scientific information freely, as if hoping someone will respond. They even broadcast the location of their homeworld. And what did you conclude from this behavior? General Korith looked uncomfortable. At first, I thought they were incredibly stupid. No intelligent species would reveal so much about themselves to potential enemies. But after watching hundreds of hours of their transmissions, he paused, as if struggling with his words. Continue, the Empress commanded. I began to think they were not trying to hide from other species. They were trying to attract them. Everything they broadcast seemed designed to make other intelligences curious about them, to make contact more likely. The Empress nodded. They were not preparing for war with unknown aliens. They were preparing for friendship. What else did you observe? Their entertainment is confusing, General Korith admitted. They tell stories about wars, but the heroes usually try to avoid fighting until they have no choice. They tell stories about disasters, but the focus is always on people, helping each other survive. They seem to think that working together to overcome problems is more interesting than simply defeating enemies. Jake listened in amazement as the general described human culture from an alien perspective. But most strange of all, General Korith continued, are their news broadcasts. They report on conflicts and tragedies, yes. But they also report on what they call human interest stories. These are news reports about ordinary people doing kind things for each other. A human who saves a lost animal. A group of humans who build a house for a neighbor whose home burned down. Children who collect money to help other children in distant countries. The general's scales finally settled into a steady, deep blue color. They report these small kindnesses as if they are as important as wars and politics. As if they are proud of their species for caring about each other. And what is your conclusion? The Empress asked. General Korith looked directly at Jake. I think this human speaks truth about his people. They are not warriors in the traditional sense. They are something else, something we have never encountered before. The Empress descended slowly back to her normal height. The electric feeling in the air gradually faded, but Jake could feel that something fundamental had changed in the Great Hall. I have been studying your species for months, Jake. Morrison, the Empress said, switching back to English. Ever since our scouts first detected your ship approaching our territory, I have watched your movies and your television shows. I have listened to your music and read your literature. I have observed your people through every transmission you send into space. She began to walk slowly around Jake, studying him from every angle. Your people fascinate me, You are individually weak, but collectively strong. You fight wars, but dream of peace. You create weapons, but prefer to create art. You are afraid of the dark between stars, but you build ships to sail into it anyway. Jake stood perfectly still as she circled him. I have seen your people risk their lives to save animals they will never see again. I have watched them give food to strangers who cannot repay them. I have observed them weep for the suffering of people on the other side of their world. She stopped directly in front of him again. Most curious of all, I have seen them create stories about meeting alien species. In almost every one of these stories, the humans hope the aliens will be friends. Even when they imagine hostile aliens, they usually imagine that understanding and communication can solve the conflict. The Empress reached out with one clawed hand and touched the crystal chains that bound Jake's wrists. Your people came to us with hope, not conquest in their hearts. Our response was violence. The shame of that first meeting belongs to us, not to you. Jake felt tears starting in his eyes, but he blinked them back. Great Empress, both our peoples made mistakes. What matters now is what we do next. Indeed, she looked around the great hall at her assembled court. What we do next will determine whether the galaxy becomes a more dangerous place or a more wondrous one. The Empress raised her voice so that everyone in the hall could hear her clearly. I have made my decision. Empress Kayla raised both her hands, and the great hall fell into absolute silence. Even the living walls seemed to dim their pulsing light, as if the entire palace was holding its breath for her words. For 700 years, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, the Zephyrian Empire has grown by conquest. We have met 43 different species among the stars. We have defeated them all. We have taken their worlds, absorbed their knowledge, and added their strength to our own. She paused, her burning eyes sweeping across the faces of her court. Today, we meet a species that forces us to ask a new question. What if conquest is not the only path to strength? General Korath stepped forward, his scales now showing deep concern. Great Empress, surely you do not mean to show mercy to the humans. They are weak. They would only slow our expansion. Weakness? The Empress turned to look at Jake, who stood motionless in his crystal chains. General, tell me what you call it when a being faces certain death but refuses to beg for mercy. That would be VEKTAR, Great Empress, honor. And what do you call it when a leader takes responsibility for the deaths of those under their command, even when those deaths were not their fault? General Korath's scales flickered. That is techful, the burden of command. And what do you call it when someone learns a foreign language in 3 days so they can speak respectfully to their captors? The general was quiet for a long moment. There is no word for that in our language. Great Empress. Exactly. The Empress began to walk toward Jake, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The humans have shown us concepts that we have no words for, because we have forgotten how to value them. She stopped directly in front of Jake and extended one clawed hand toward his chains. Jake Morrison of the human species, I do not grant you mercy. Mercy is what the strong give to the weak out of pity. I grant you something far more valuable. Her claws touched the crystal bonds around his wrists. The chains began to glow brighter, then suddenly shattered into 1,000 points of light that fell to the floor like snow. I grant you respect, she said, and with respect comes freedom. Jake rubbed his wrists where the chains had been, hardly believing what was happening. Around the hall,